Welcome to our continuing study of the book of Revelation chapters 15 and 16. We are reading and understanding the book, the message, to understand the meaning. What does it say? What does it mean? Confident that we can understand the book of Revelation. In this lesson, we conclude the little open scroll. 3 scrolls in the book. John is writing a scroll, but the major apocalyptic vision of the book of Revelation, chapters 4 through 16, is revealed in 2 scrolls. A scroll that is sealed with the seals opened by the Lamb, and a second little open scroll that John receives. We conclude the little open scroll. The story is moving rapidly. This central vision is going to conclude about 2/3 of the book of Revelation. In chapters 15 and 16, 7 angels with 7 plagues. This is the 3rd sign in the little scroll of the woman with child, the dragon, both of those we saw in chapter 12, and now chapter 15, the 7 plagues. Chapters 15, verses 1 through 8. There will be no more delay. I remember chapter 6, the question of the ones under the altar, the martyrs under the altar, how long? I remember the statement after the 7 thunders are sealed in chapter 10, verses 6 and 7. No more delay, no more extension of time concerning God's patience, no more opportunity for repentance. So we come to understand the number of repeated themes. This is divine judgment. God's judgment will no longer be delayed. As we come to chapter 16, the plagues parallel the trumpets, but they are more destructive. Plagues, bowls of God's wrath, depending on your translation. There is no intervention after the 6th of these plagues, before the 7th. Remember the phrase, no more delay. The story moves directly to the 7th plague. And then the destruction of Babylon, the destruction of Rome, is told in 5 short verses. It is done. God's wrath and fury unleashed, the fury of his wrath with a plague of hail, which we saw foreshadowed at the end of chapter 11. Of course, all of this is symbolic language, a figurative description of God's fury. We saw something like that in the earthquake at the end of chapter 6. Also in chapter 8, verses 1 through 5, we had a vision into heaven, a view into heaven again in 11, verses 15 through 19. And here a parallel. As we near the end of the central vision of the book, the primary message of the book, we come to another grouping of 7. Let me try to organize very quickly what has occurred thus far in the book. I do not have written notes for this, but if you'll listen very carefully, I think you'll remember much of what I'm going to share briefly. 7 seals show that the church was being protected by God in a hostile world, even with the death of faithful witnesses, and that God's judgment had not been put on hold. God in control of history, not allowing the destruction of the church, the faith community. The 7th seal introduced 7 trumpets, 7 trumpets of warning and judgment, with the possibility of repentance and salvation for those doing evil, but few responded. Those destroying were destroying themselves. God's patient holiness and mercy waited as repentance was offered, and toward the end of the sequence of trumpets, John was given a little scroll with instructions to prophesy again after the 7th trumpet sounded. No more delay in fulfilling God's purpose. So we began the little scroll, chapters 12 through 16, and now 7 bowls of wrath will be poured out on Rome. The church is secure. Opportunity for repentance has been extended to evildoers, is now past. God's judgment and wrath will be released against Rome, and all of that was foreshadowed in our study of chapter 14. As we heard 3 angelic pronouncements concerning coming destruction, the destruction of Babylon, Rome, those who worshiped the beast, those who were opponents, those who followed the beast. The 7 angels now with 7 plagues are identified, and these are called the last plagues, because the wrath of God will be finished. And again, these 7 angels are the third sign in the little scroll. John sees those who have been victorious over the beast singing the song of Moses, the song of the Lamb. We read that part of the song in chapter 15, verses 3 and 4, a victory song. And then the 7 angels are sent forth, quickly transitioning us from the short verses of chapter 15 into chapter 16, verse 1. These bowls of wrath resemble the plagues of the Old Testament and also the sequence of the trumpets. But now the judgment is no longer partial. The first 4 bowls affect the earth in general. The 5th bowl affects the throne and kingdom of the beast, chapter 16, verses 10 and 11. The 6th bowl opens the way for kings who will oppose Rome, giving them easy access across the dried up river Euphrates. From the mouths of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet come unclean spirits, frogs, continuing the connection to the Old Testament plagues. These are the spirits of demons working false signs, deceiving the kings of the earth. They convince the kings to assemble for the war of the great day of God, chapter 16, verse 14, at Armageddon, chapter 16, verse 16. This battle will result in the overthrow of the beast and the false prophet. Remember, the beast and the false prophet are symbols for the Roman Empire. And now a comment must also be made about Armageddon as we think about how quickly God's judgment comes, the promise, no more delay, the statement, it is done, the very quick description of the judgment against Rome. Armageddon is a reference to the mountain of Megiddo. This is based on Old Testament backgrounds, apocalyptic symbols. There is technically no such place. Megiddo is not a mountain. Megiddo is a plain, a flat area, and a famous battlefield. For example, with Deborah and Barak in Judges chapter 5, Ahaziah and Jehu in 2 Kings 9, Josiah's death in 2 Kings 23, and mentioned also in Zechariah 12, connecting it to Ezekiel 38:39 with the reference to Gog and Magog, which we will soon meet again. That connection will be seen twice more, in fact, in the book of Revelation. In the book of Revelation, Armageddon symbolizes a battlefield, the place of the final overthrow of the beast and the false prophet, of the forces of Rome. Enemies arise against God's people and are destroyed by God. And Revelation 16:15 warns about the Lord's coming in judgment against Rome. The judgment against Rome, then, again, is told in only 5 verses, verses 17 through 21. Chaotic and yet complete. There is little detail here. More information will come in the next vision, which will begin in chapter 17, as John is shown details of the judgment against Rome. 4 chapters and a few verses. Chapters 17, 18, 19, and 20, and a few verses of chapter 21. That is another study, another vision after the central apocalyptic vision, but the certainty of God's judgment against all enemies. And so again, as noted, there's no delay between the 6th bowl and the 7th bowl. It is done. It is finished. The final bowl of God's wrath in this part of the story has been emptied. And we are ready for chapter 17, which is the beginning of the 3rd vision in the book. But before we move ahead, as we think about the certainty of God's promises and judgment, all that we have covered, we're going to take time for another review. As we finish the 2nd vision of the book, we'll look back and hoping we'll be able to make sense of what we've seen and be prepared for our study in the next video of the 3rd vision of the book, beginning in chapter 17. Looking forward to seeing you then. May God bless you as you seek to read and understand the book of Revelation.